I know quite a few of you, but just in case we've never met, my name is Rebecca Snell, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at the Chapman. And I'm glad that you guys could join us tonight. So tonight we're going to hear from Maureen Folk, who's our Curator of Collections here at the Chapman. And she's going to give a talk on our current exhibition, which is called Chapman Yearbook, 60 Years of Collecting, because it's our 60th anniversary. So this exhibition, if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, is it kind of highlights 6 decades of collecting objects that tell the stories of Glens Falls, Queensbury, and the Lower Adirondacks region. So tonight in her talk, Maureen is going to share the process that she went through for curating the current exhibition, from uncovering some of those hidden gems to choosing the stories that she felt and we felt best represent our community's rich history. The gallery is open now and will be open after the talk. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, or you want to go back and check out, your favorite object, it will be open after the talk. So feel free to check that out. And now I will turn things over.
Thank you very much, Becca. I'm excited to share a little inside look at this exhibition and how it came together, and show you what 60 years of collecting has brought to us here at the museum. So an anniversary exhibition like this one is fun to plan for because it's special. You get to do something new and unique. Typically, we're looking at concepts that have more specific topics that we can pull specific objects from the collection for. So as an example, if we're creating an exhibit on the Glens Falls Insurance Company, we know that our research is going to be about the insurance company, and we know that the objects we pull are going to supplement that story. But for this, it was kind of backwards. So we selected the objects, and then we ended up building this narrative around the objects. A lot of museums will do like a 60 objects for 60 years type concept for this kind of anniversary exhibition. And we did this, but with a little bit of a twist and not quite 60. We have about 63 objects in our show, but they're sorted into yearbook senior superlative categories. So if you haven't seen the exhibit yet, that's really the main fun concept that it's structured under. And the idea for using the senior superlative categories formed somewhat naturally because as I was looking at our collection of objects, I was trying to determine which objects spoke best to the rich and varied history of this area and kind of touch on a little bit of everything. You're not going to be able to touch on a little bit of everything, but almost like the best sampler you can put together. I wanted to showcase industries and individuals that have shaped the community development, businesses that have been around for a long time, and pieces that represented everyday people who would have lived and worked here, because at the end of the day, that's really our mission, is to tell the local story. So, and I also wanted to celebrate our mission as a museum, which as an organization, which is to present the history of the Glens Falls Queensbury community and its connection to the Adirondack region. So with these things in mind, instead of looking through our computer database, which is where we can find all of our collections items, or almost all of them, I instead went directly into our actual physical collection storage spaces and just started to look around. And I did that because I wanted to see if something would just strike me visually that I might not have found by looking on the computer, or might not have thought to search for, because on the computer you have to search by certain terms, and maybe I won't come across something that's really visually striking and interesting if I'm doing it that way. So I went directly into collections to look around. I've been a curator here for a few years now, but I don't know everything that we have, so I really wanted to scour things. Our collection storage, you can see some pieces of it here. This is part of our archive storage. This is part of our archive storage as well. This is actually our Seneca Ray Stoddard photo collection. A lot of boxes. Yeah. And then this is some of our collection of artwork that is on this like cage rack type thing. And then this is up in our collection space. These are racks of clothing that are covered to prevent dust collection. And here you can just see a small sample of our milk bottles. And this is full of plates and silverware and other things. So we have a wall of tools, shelves, and rolling racks of clothing, quilts, furniture. We have an entire corner of traveling trunk, trunks, we have boxes of medical equipment, musical instruments, sets and sets of dishes, ceramics and silver, sports trophies, military uniforms, milk bottles, snowshoes. We've got a little bit of everything. So it's hard to choose. How do you choose 63 objects? So this list is only a fraction of what we have in the collection. So we needed to look around and see, again, what was visually appealing and spoke to significant local events. So once I started to think about this and explore, that list that I had in my mind of what we might include in the show grew to include logging tools, military memorabilia, textiles produced by local manufacturers, portraits of significant figures, paintings and sculptures by local artists, tourism and vacationing items, and a few photographs. Now, the senior superlative that ended up coming to mind first and kind of sparked this whole concept was best dressed. And it struck me instantly because we have a huge, huge clothing collection here at the museum. If we had more mannequins, we could do more clothing shows. So you might think, oh, why doesn't the Chapman do a clothing show? Well, we'll have to ask everyone in Warren County for how many mannequins they have so we can borrow them. But I thought of best dressed first because I was looking at our clothing and I knew that the McMullen-Levins pieces had to be a part of that story. The shirt factory is such a rich part of our history in the past and today in a different way. And so I really wanted to include those pieces, as well as some Victorian era fashion, because that's the time period that a lot of Glens Falls growth occurred. So from there, the other categories kind of came up. So best dressed was the start. So the categories in the show include most likely to succeed, best dressed, class clown, most school spirit, most athletic, most artistic, most likely to travel the world, most changed since freshman year, and most likely to be remembered. So some fun categories. They were chosen specifically. We could have done other ones like most popular, what are some other superlatives? We could have done them, but we needed categories that it wouldn't be people fitting into the category, it would be objects. So objects can't fit into every superlative category. And we ended up tailoring these to kind of fit our needs. So let's start with most likely to succeed. We decided that the objects in this category would represent achievements that left a lasting impact from industrial growth and advancement, political investment, creative innovations, and philanthropy. Each of these objects represents vision, innovation, and influence, which were fitting examples of success that kind of continued to resonate today. So for this category, I chose to include Seneca Ray Stoddard's camera, a campaign button for Charles Evans Hughes, a photograph of Henry Crandall, a photograph of the Horicon steamboat, and there's a lot, and a switch set from the Spire Falls Dam. And there's a lot to learn from our region from this set of, or this group of objects here. So Stoddard, this is his camera here, created one of the largest photographic records of the greater Glens Falls region and the Adirondacks at large. He also influenced the original establishment of the Adirondack Park, in no small part. Henry Crandall donated land for city parks that are still heavily used today, established a library, and supported local projects and organizations, which is just skimming the surface of what he did. Steamboats on Lake George have had a legacy that began more than 200 years ago, and those have shaped the development and the exploration of Lake George, which has enhanced tourism in this industry, or in this area, excuse me. And the logging industry launched Glens Falls into becoming one of the most profitable towns in New York State in the mid to late 1800s, leading it to become a city in 1908, signed off on by Charles Evans Hughes, who was yet to be the 11th Chief Justice of the United States. It's pretty striking objects in Category 1. So you can read more details about all of these. What I'm going to basically be including tonight is a couple little snippets of information that we might not have included, or just really sending home why we picked those objects out of our more than 32,000 items in our collection. That includes photographs, archival records, and objects. Narrow that down. Yeah. And last but not least, we have this switch set, which might be a little unassuming, but it's featured in this category because it was flipped on September 8th, 1903 at 3:15 p.m., and it commenced the delivery of power from Spire Falls Dam, which continues to provide electricity for Saratoga, Schenectady, Glens Falls, Troy, and Albany. So there's a little plaque. You can see it in the exhibit. This plaque has that information listed on the top. And I believe the name of the young woman who flipped the switch is also on the plaque. Oop, go back, getting ahead of myself. These objects, just like I've been saying, scratch the surface of the significant people and industries that have shaped our local history, but they represent some really monumental moments and aspects, so that's why they were chosen. All right, so best dressed. The objects in this category showcase not only a particular era's fashion, but also explore the important role that Glens Falls played in the textile industry. I chose to include a Victorian era day dress, a men's cotton shirt produced at McMullen Levens, an ensemble also from McMullen Levens, but it's from their classic series, a hand fan, and a pair of men's gloves. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a really large clothing collection. So there's a lot to choose from, but McMullen Levens pieces were my number one. I knew that they needed to be included because the shirt factory over the course of 9 decades employed hundreds, over 1,000 workers over that time, primarily women. So we definitely wanted to strongly feature that work. So from McMullen Levens, I chose the men's dress shirt without the collar, because this is specifically because this is how this business got its start. When the company opened in 1902, a partnership with local businessman B.B. Fowler, you've maybe seen that name on a building downtown, provided the detachable collars, while McMullen Levens initially focused on the shirts. So B.B. Fowler was already making collars. They didn't want to step on his toes as a fellow local industrialist, and they decided to partner instead. So that's what they initially focused on. And then I wanted to include, I know it's a duplicate of McMullen, but I wanted to include something from the classic series, because this was a transformative series for the business. They had a new designer come in. Her name was Dorothy Cox, and she launched McMullen Levens into just a different sphere of popularity with new designs and really tapping into a more modern woman and what she might want in her clothing. It made McMullen Levens globally recognized, nationally recognized, like they were very, very popular. And it was transformative for them post-World War II. They were making millions of dollars post-World War II, so they were doing really well in a time that was a little bit tumultuous. And then, so the Victorian day dress over here was included because that period, like I said, the Victorian period was completely transformative for local history. We have it well documented in text and photographs from the 1840s and on. There were just huge, huge developments in this area. And so this was a way for me to talk about the importance of the Victorian era, but also show some of the fashion. We have gained such a rich understanding of everyday life in the past from how well documented this period is. And while we have many beautiful Victorian era dresses in the collection, I chose this because it belonged to Sarah McEachran, who was the wife of lumber baron William McEachran. It's also in fantastic condition, which you don't always find. And it is a teeny tiny waist, if you're curious. And the gloves here were included in the exhibit. They were manufactured at Clark Brothers Manufacturing in 1940. And that's another company that did textiles, and they focused on gloves, and then they switched to netting, mosquito netting during the war. And then they come back to gloves. Andre, you might be my source on that, but came back to gloves, but produced a lot of gloves, different materials, different colors, very a great company. It's now the Mills Apartments. The sign, it says Clark Brothers on the side of the building. Yep. But it was another company that employed hundreds of workers and really contributed to this vibrant textile landscape that we had here in town. And last, I included this folding fan because for more than 400 years, women have used the language of the fan. It was really fully ingrained in life for women prior to the early 1900s, and it was for centuries. And it really just fell out of use in the early 20th century. So when you look back at women's fashion prior to that end, the folding fan is a constant companion. So it might seem silly, but it just felt like it really belonged in this category. There also is a name on the, I forget I have a blazer here. This says Elsie Streeter, so she would have been the owner of the fan. So it's cool that you can see her name written on it too. So again, this category is scratching the surface, but it highlights that vibrant textile landscape that existed here, as well as some changes in fashion. Oh, flipping my page before I need to. All right, so the next category was class clown. And the objects in this category, we wanted them to feature playful designs, silly concepts, and amusing histories or uses. Not only are the objects in this category just fun, they also speak to important aspects of our regional history. So we have bingo cards from the Sagamore Resort, a felt hat from Storytown, USA, Glens Falls board game, an amusing place to strike a match, a coin saver from a local bank, and sculptures by Bronco Charlie Miller. So the Sagamore Resort bingo cards and the Storytown hat really speak to a central element of our local economy, and that's tourism. Tourism is just a central part of our economy here, and it has been since the mid-19th century. Primarily New York City residents initially would travel north seeking that fresh air in the woods, but this industry grew and has really totally shaped how this region has been developed and looking for attractions for visitors and things. So this was a fun way to talk about the importance of tourism for our local development. I included the Bronco Charlie sculptures, and this piece here was adopted by Gloria. I included these in this category. I have Bronco Charlie in 2 categories, so we'll get to him in a later category as well. But I included him here because a little remembered fact about Bronco Charlie's pieces is that he intended them to be toys. So he made these sculptures, he painted them, but he wanted them to be played with by children and enjoyed. He didn't think of them as this folk art collection that would someday be housed in a museum and like properly placed in a box and kept forever. He thought of them as toys. So I think some of those pieces really belonged in this category because of that. The coin saver was included as an amusing way, obviously, to store your savings. And we have some great, it's all dimes. And we have some really good dimes in there from the 1930s and 40s. But it was branded by Glens Falls National Bank. And this was a way that small banks around the United States were branding a way for kids to save their money. So this is your pocket piggy bank. You can save your money when you're on the go. But it was a way for us to talk about Glens Falls National Bank and their history in this area as well. It's paper. It is paper. It's like a hard, it opens like an envelope. Yep.
Is that something that would be in my time? Why do I remember that?
I'll have to double check the date on the label. But we could take a look at that. We have actually 2 others in our collection. They're all from Glens Falls National, but they're not all pigs, which I thought was funny because the pocket pig makes sense to me, piggy bank. But one of them is like a bear, and I was like, well, that makes a little less sense. But and the Glens Falls board game here was a really fun find. This was actually an item that I did not know we had until I was looking through the aisles of our collection. It was like a fun twist on Monopoly. So it was a popular family game and a way for you to see which local businesses were popular. This came out in 1980, I believe, or within the 80s. And it's a really cool piece to look at because you've got businesses with their old logos. You've got, oh, I forgot that this business existed, and they're on one of the Monopoly tiles. So if you're going to check out the exhibit after the talk, check out this board game. It's really fun. Really cool to see some of the places that were open and some places that are still open. So this is really fun. I definitely check that out later. And then I included this little leather sign because it's practical in use. It obviously gave me a chuckle when I found it. But it was practical for what we were doing here because I was able to talk about matches and wood stoves and the role that they've played in the Adirondack experience because of this just funny little piece. It's just a place to strike a match that would have been hung near a place that you needed light. But it's also just a fun reminder that museums can collect fun and amusing things, not just important photographs and documents and materials, but games and humorous items so long as they have a local connection. So we have lawn games in our collection. We have all sorts of things that you wouldn't expect, but they were either owned by somebody locally important or they come from somewhere locally important. All right, so our next category, most athletic. The objects in this category relate to sports, physical activities, outdoor adventures, or athletic events. We have a region flourishing with outdoor activities, and this is just a small sample of the activities that have historically been enjoyed throughout the Adirondacks. So we included 2 photographs of Glens Falls basketball teams, a photograph of a golf exhibition at Glens Falls Country Club, an Adirondack pack basket, an Adirondack Red Wings pennant, and small Spalding snow skis, say that 5 times fast, and a volunteer uniform from the 1980 Olympics. So the Glens Falls basketball teams, the basketball program in recent history has produced some really outstanding athletes who have gone on to find success playing professionally. And so we included a photo of the 1917 and 1918 team in tandem with the 2024-2025 championship team, just to showcase the long-standing excellence of the Glens Falls basketball program and the impact that it's had on this community. The old team, you can read this in the exhibit text, but there was a newspaper article that noted that this team played one of the finest exhibitions of the game that they had ever seen. This was 1918, so take that as you will. But an outstanding team paired with another outstanding team. And the other reason I wanted to include the 2025 team is because this photograph was donated just a few months ago in 2025. And this is a way for us to also showcase that a true 60 years of collecting. So we have a piece in the exhibit from our very first year, and we have a piece from most recently, 2025. So truly showcasing 60 years. And if you look at the accession numbers on the labels in the exhibit, which I can show you where those are, you'll see that we have objects in the show from every decade since our founding in 1965. So the golf photo here, that was a way for us to highlight the long-standing history of golf in this region and some interesting history about the Glens Falls Country Club. This is Walter Hagen golfing in an exhibition just a year, I believe, after he went out on his own without a country club backing him as a professional touring golfer. So he was just kind of striking out on his own then. The pack basket was included because it's one of those images that we just continue to associate with outdoor adventure and the Adirondacks. Pack baskets were originally tools. They would have carried equipment and food across the rugged Adirondack landscape. From hiking, camping, fishing, boating, this pack basket could be used. Originally, these baskets would have been used by Indigenous people, but as they were adopted by colonists, they modernized it a little bit to their tastes, and the pack basket that you see today, that is what is most well known. And that was created then by some colonial influence. The Adirondack Red Wings pennant marks an important milestone for that team, which was 10 years. And that's a milestone that the current team, the Adirondack Thunder, also celebrated in 2025. Red Wings hockey became a staple local sporting event to attend, attracting thousands of fans and building a love of hockey in this city that has endured for 46 years, which might seem hard to believe. And in addition, the construction of the Civic Center has supported not only the hockey residency, but it has opened the door for countless events that have been hosted in Glens Falls. So huge impact. These Spalding snow skis speak to the impact of the skiing industry a little bit and how winter sports have shaped our community and broader region. A sport that really surged in popularity in this region following the 1932 Lake Placid Olympics, that it really took off. So I believe Whiteface opened after that, Gore opened after that, and I'm missing a big one. It's not West. It's in the exhibit. I have it written in the exhibit text. So definitely check that out if you're a skier. And last, the volunteer uniform from the 1980 Lake Placid Olympics is a cool way for us to highlight our proximity to these important global events and just our broader connection with the Adirondack region, because the volunteer who wore this uniform lived in Glens Falls at the time and traveled north to be a part of this event. And we've heard that story a few times since this exhibit has opened. So a lot of people in this area were directly involved in the Lake Placid Olympics. So we could have included more baseball uniforms, basketballs, trophies, and all those other things, but we did have a sports exhibition here just last year. So we chose to highlight some different items and tune in more with some outdoor recreation in addition to athletics, since recreation is really such a rich part of this area. Okay, most school spirited is our next category. And this is one of my favorites. This is like most community pride is really what the category should be. We wanted the objects in this category to celebrate community pride, to showcase the Glens Falls, Queensbury region's historically diverse businesses and creative and inspiring individuals. So this was a fun category because it's perfect for showcasing some maybe everyday objects, but ones that spoke to significant places and people. So I chose to include a notebook from the Queensbury Hotel, from the construction of the Queensbury Hotel, written from the perspective of one of the workers, a brochure advertising the Portland Cement Company, a metal sign for the Rockwell House Hotel, an advertisement for the Glens Falls Insurance Company here, a photograph of Cooper's Cave, a chair owned and used by Addison Beecher Colvin, and a marking hammer from the logging industry here, and a portrait of the DeLong family, which you can see at the top there, and a telegraph station for the fire department, which I can give you a cool anecdote here. We've had the telegraph station in our collection for a number of years, but we just acquired this piece, which is why it's still in the room with us. And this is part of the fire alarm telegraph system. So number 16 is this box number, which would have alerted firemen at the Ridge Street headquarters to go to, what is it, Broad and Mission. So now they know the location of the fire. And a more serendipitous moment, the gentleman who donated this used to live near number 16. So I got to show him the actual alarm box. I know. I know. So that was a cool addition. And this will be on display in the reception area soon, so you'll get to learn more about this piece. So the image of Cooper's Cave was included in this category because the narrative spun in James Fenimore Cooper's 1826 novel, Last of the Mohicans, has continued to bring people to this region in the spirit of history and adventure for the last 2 centuries. So the local cement industry was an employer of thousands of local workers during its 130-year history. So this pamphlet is really just a way to be able to talk about the impact of that industry. So there's a lot more in the exhibit on that. The Rockwell House, the sign for the Rockwell House here. The Rockwell House was one of several hotels in the region that supported the growing tourism industry. I believe I read somewhere that prior to Lake George's significant growth within the city limits of Glens Falls, there were like 20 hotels, which is hard to believe because you think of the Queensbury Hotel and you think of other smaller like inns or bed and breakfast. There were that many hotels and they were operating and people were visiting quite often. So the Hotel Rockwell, you're just ahead of me. That's all right. It's located where Hudson Avenue now connects to the traffic circle. So you turn out and you take Hudson Avenue like you're going to go towards the hospital. You wouldn't have been able to do that previously. The Rockwell House would have been there. So it burned in a fire. It was called the Hotel Towers at that time, and it burned in a fire in 1950. During its heyday, when it would have been a part of the downtown landscape, it would have been central to nearly everything happening in downtown Glens Falls. So the Rockwell House, if we're to choose one Glens Falls hotel to feature, that was the center of town superstar. It was a really beautiful building too. All right, and so we're not going to look at all of these. So the next one, the last one we'll look at in this category is the DeLong family. The portrait of the DeLong family is one of the most important pieces in our show, and I put it right at the beginning of the exhibition because the museum would not be here without the DeLong family. Their family legacy and the donation of their historic home to be used as a museum is what launched a small group of history lovers into building a historical association that would then turn into the modern day museum. There are so many objects in this category, so we're not going to look at them all, but this category is really about highlighting community and the things that made this community in particular so special. All right, the next category, most artistic. The objects in this category showcase skill and creativity of local artists, celebrating photography, painting, theater, and sculpture. I chose to include an oil painting by Seneca Ray Stoddard, a watercolor by Harriet Bentley, a photograph of the Paramount Theater, and a pair of oxen sculpted by Bronco Charlie. So we have some really beautiful paintings in our collection here, but I knew I wanted to showcase Harriet Bentley. You can learn more about her in the exhibit. She was an incredible woman, but she was a painter, a cartographer, and an inventor. She taught both here and in New York City. She loved art and taught art her entire life. Really interesting woman. So we have a couple of her pieces, and we included this one in the show.
And that's oil.
It's watercolor. And then Bronco Charlie, I once again included him here because while I discussed his sculptures as toys, what he ultimately did end up creating is this beautiful collection of folk art. And you can see the development of his skills, his style, the pieces that he chose to, like the raw pieces that he chose to use. You can see that throughout time in his work. It's really, really wonderful collection. The oxen are one of my favorite pieces of his. And we are lucky to have a collection of more than 250 of his sculptures. So if you missed the Bronco Charlie show a couple years ago, I'm sorry, that was a really good one. I included the oil painting here by Stoddard because we so frequently discuss Stoddard as a photographer and a cartographer, but it can be forgotten that he was also a very talented painter, and that's where he got his start. He started painting ornamental train cars, landscape scenes inside train cars. So this is where he got his start. And this is just one small piece. I think we have 3 or 4 of his paintings in our collection. And last, I included this photograph of the Paramount Theater to highlight the important role that theater plays in our region, in our cultural landscape. The arts have been an important part of this community for a long time and an important contributor to its success and its growth. And if we had a bigger gallery, there'd be a lot more paintings included in this, but because of limited space, we did just leave it to these 4 for this category. All right, so the next category is most likely to travel the world. The objects in this category connect the Southern Adirondack region with people and cultures across the world. The objects we put in this category include a bomber jacket from World War II, a collage of the Adirondack Balloon Festival, these interesting leather shoes, a time globe, and a wedding gown with a great story. So I wanted a category like this in the exhibition because we have a lot of objects in our collection that come from somewhere else or have an attachment to somewhere else, other places in the world. So I wanted to highlight that we have that here in this collection too. So the leather shoes are kind of funny. They were purchased by Stoddard as a souvenir on a trip to Asia. We don't know a lot about them otherwise, but take a look at those shoes if you get a chance to go into the gallery after. They're not what you would want to wear. They don't look comfortable at all. They're very interesting. And I believe they're one of the very few things we have in our collection from Asia. And we don't know what part, unfortunately. The bomber jacket was owned by Mr. Howard Grout, and it features his B-17 that he flew in World War II, named $1 Million Baby on the back. There's more information about the jacket, but these represent the number of missions that him and his flight crew flew successfully. So the collage here from the Balloon Festival, it marks the debut of the Balloon Festival, and that is a festival that has connected Glens Falls to our sister city in Saga, Japan for the last 37 years. We can thank Millie Ko for all the work that she's done there. And so this is a really cool piece. You can see some interesting things written, and definitely check that one out. The time globe is just an amusing invention by a Glens Falls transplant. His name was Louis Jouvet. He came from Switzerland, and he created this amusement so that you would be able to tell time all over the world. So you'd spin. So unfortunately, the one we have in the show is a reproduction, but we do have an original timepiece, which would have been this like upper piece of hardware. So we have that in the collection, but we put the reproduction on display because it makes more sense within that context. But that's interesting. I'll have to keep that in mind. And then one of my favorite pieces in the show is this wedding dress. And this was a wedding gown worn by Jean Webb Nelson in 1946. And the skirt of the dress was made from her husband's parachute from World War II. So there was a fabric shortage at this point after World War II. And so there were other people who were using the same tactic, but for us to have a piece of that from a local couple that got married, it's a really, really exciting thing to have in our collection.
Is their family still in our area?
That I'd have to look at. It was donated by Jean. Yep.
What's her husband's name?
The label probably says, yeah. But yeah, donated by them. Yep. Okay, so the next category, we're coming to the end here. This had 10 objects, most changed since freshman year. This one's really fun. The objects in this category have evolved over time. So while we may use many of these objects today, they've been modernized or operate a little differently than they once did. And this category gave us the opportunity to explore more simple technologies and simple technological evolutions that continue to have a big impact on like everyday life. Our collection is full of so many of these simple little tools and things, and it's a great way to highlight some of those more what people might consider mundane objects. Nothing's mundane to us here in the museum, but so in this category, we included a $2 banknote from the Commercial Bank of Glens Falls, and it is signed by Augustus Sherman. A flat iron from the shirt factory. You can see it says Troy Works here. An inkwell for a quill. Oops. An inkwell for a quill there. A magic lantern for a projection show. A mugshot camera used by the Glens Falls Police Department. A powder horn used during the French and Indian War. A printing plate that was used in the last run of the Post Star on lead print plates in 1972, and a projectile point from 3,000 years ago, a tally board documentation system from Joint to Lime, and a vacuum sweeper from the Boston store downtown. So in some way, shape, or form, these technologies can all still be found and used today. Currency, clothing irons, pens, projectors, cameras, bullets for the powder horn, digital printing, knives for the projectile point, spreadsheets, which would replace the tally board here, and even sweeper vacuums. You can find your own still. So these are all technologies that have really stood the test of time, but we were able to talk about a bunch of different local people and places because of these little mundane objects. So, and one of the things we do as a local history museum is celebrating everyday life and everyday people that would have lived and worked here. And these are important parts to that story. All right, the last category, most likely to be remembered. The objects in this category hold particular significance to the Chapman collection, or they leave a strong impression on those that learn about them. And so this is where we wanted to put some of our superstar items. So that includes the Joubert and White carriage, a gilded frame portrait of James Morgan, a piece of Glens Falls black marble, a legal contract between Samuel Prine and Thomas Ogden, a commemorative plate, a cast iron anchor from the Big Boom, and last but not least, a painting of George Washington at Halfway Brook, completed by Jean-Léon Jerome Ferris between 1895 and 1913. So let's start with the Joubert and White carriage. It's on permanent display in our Carriage House Gallery, but we wanted to pull it out and have it be better incorporated into this show. The company patented a new suspension system that popularized this buckboard and the style, and it became internationally popular. So you can learn more about that one in the exhibit, but it's really a superstar item we have here. The legal document between Samuel Prine and Thomas Ogden, you might not think is maybe worthy of this category, but it's for the sale of a canal boat to Mr. Prine. And it might seem unfitting, but when you put it into the context of the canal era and the canal industry and the impact that it had, it was a massive impact on this local economy. And it is, I believe it is the reason that Glens Falls exists in the way that it does today, because it built up this region so much. So that's when that letter becomes a little bit more important to a broader story that is a deep part of our community history. So the portrait of James Morgan was painted in 1870, 3 years prior to his death. He managed the Morgan Lime Company and the Glens Falls Paper Mill. The gilded frame and the canvas were both restored several years ago, but since then, it represents one of the finest portraits that we have in the collection. We have a lot of beautiful portraits, but this one is just in really stellar condition. The commemorative plate was included. This was produced to celebrate the bicentennial in 1976, which was well celebrated in this area. This plate marks the anniversary with illustrations of important local landmarks like the Civil War Monument and the Old Covered Bridge. So it was a good way for us to look at those items or look at those places. The cast iron anchor, losing my spot here, showcases a significant development in the logging industry in town, and that was the addition of the Big Boom. And so it's talked about more in there, but it held logs for sorting in the Hudson River for decades. It was essential to logging operations in town. And then the marble tile was quarried here along the Hudson River from land just behind the Finch Mill main office. And if you don't want to see our piece here in the museum, you can go to Washington, D.C. It's on the 160-foot landing of the Washington Monument, as well as the representative piece of stone from New York State. We have two pieces of it in our collection, but this is about double the size of the other piece that we have. I think it was just a floor tile, or it was inset as a used tile previously. All right, so the marble tile, and then, so the painting of Washington at Halfway Brook, it's one in a series of 15 that illustrate historical events from the Revolutionary period and the French and Indian War period. And what I think will make this painting even more memorable is its inclusion in an upcoming Ken Burns project. So if you're a big history buff like we are, you will be able to see it. We think in November, it's going to come out in a documentary about the American Revolution that Ken Burns production company is doing. And I think you will see this painting come up if you give that a watch. So these were the objects chosen for the show. And I think that we really touch on a broad range of history that spans more than 3 decades. I mean, really going back, if we include that projectile point. But just a quick way to show you how this comes together at the very end. When we're planning an exhibition, we like to use a miniature version of the gallery to design how the exhibition is going to be installed. So we print out miniature versions of all of the objects in the show. They are on a scale of 1 foot equals ½ inch of space. So that's how we scale things down for our diorama, which you're please welcome to take a look at afterwards. This helps us figure out how these objects can be displayed together in these categories that we've created, so that when we go to install everything, it's not like, oh, well, that doesn't fit there. We thought it would fit there. So we also, this is the part in the process where we determine how many mannequins do we need for clothing? How many display cases do we have to use? Do we need to purchase new hardware to install something specific? So this is the point in the process where we flesh out those details. So yeah, so these are all the little pieces that we print, and they are teeny tiny, you'll see. Okay, and then installation. Our installation period for this exhibition was 3 weeks, which is a little bit longer. We usually are able to do it in 2, but 3 gives us extra wiggle room. During the first day, we take down all of the objects from the previous exhibit, which for this one was dining out. And during that first week, we get them all returned to collection storage, properly restored, and we patch holes, we repair damage to the walls, we sand and paint and move cases around, and we remove things that are no longer going to be used, and we bring in additional materials that we know will be used. And so once the paint dries and the gallery is cleaned up from that, all of that, the objects for the 60th exhibition were brought down from our collection storage, which is just above the gallery. And that's when we begin to stage the new exhibition. So this, you can see, this is my only photo from installation during the staging process of like, how are we going to put these dresses up here? But it's really wonderful to see the miniature version translate to the walls and just see it come together. So like I said, please feel free to check that out if you'd like. For every exhibit. So I've stretched this out a little bit because we're in the planning period for our fall exhibition. And once I'm done with this talk tonight, this is coming down tomorrow because we've got to plan our fall exhibition. So no, this September. We have until September for this exhibition, the 21st, but we're getting the details put together for our fall exhibition. So our planning needs to take the next step. This one, just this gallery, just the mini one. And then the final element in this exhibition was a video on our gallery TV, and that tells the story of the Chapman Museum and the DeLong House, researched by our longtime volunteer, Bob Bale. The short documentary walks you through DeLong family history, the organization's founding, important collection acquisitions, capital projects, major events in the museum's history. And to the right of the TV, you can find some artistic renditions of the Chapman Museum's historic DeLong House. So local artists have just been inspired by the beauty of our lovely brick home here on Glen Street, and they've done some nice paintings of that. So you can see those. But the DeLong family is one of the most important branches, if not the trunk of our organizational history. And so it was important that we told their story, and it was celebrated in this exhibition. But that is the talk. Thank you all so much for coming.